Hello, this is Sarah Tuberty, your host from Disarming Disability. Enjoy the following program on Public House Media. Welcome to Beauties and Headcanons, where we're nerdy, and you probably are too. I'm Lindsay, and I'm here with Teegan today, and we are here to talk nerdy to you. So this time, we're going to talk about what we've been talking about for quite some time now, and that is science fiction versus fantasy. Specifically, is this a science fiction medium, or is this a fantasy medium? And we are going to have to address Star Wars. So that's what this episode's about. I mean, we've dabbled in it just about, I'd say quite a bit of episodes talking about whether or not this is that or this is this. And we were always like, oh, we're not going to talk about that right now. Yeah. We're going to save that. We're going to save that episode. So now...
So here's this episode.
We're finally going to address it. But first... Teegan's got something that Bethesda was doing that was kind of fishy for Gaming Corner.
Yep. So anybody in the gaming world has probably heard of this by now, and it's actually already been addressed by the time we have recorded this, but I wanted to go ahead and talk about it because it's Bethesda again. I swear. I'm just going to start referring to Bethesda as Reese Bobby because every single time they start to give out some goodwill, they take it back and do something bad. I swear, just around the corner, we are just about to the point where they're going to say, Applebee's has rats. I found one in my Cobb salad. That's going to happen. I am calling it right now, and I know those of you who have not seen Talladega Nights are completely lost, but just trust me, the comparison is very, very apt. So, everybody's been kind of happy with some of the rollouts they've been doing with Fallout 76. Doom Eternal has been doing really, really good. But recently, in an update that they rolled out for Doom Eternal on May 15th, they also happened to roll out something called Denuvo Anti-Cheat, which is not the same thing as Denuvo Anti-Tamper, but it's potentially worse. So, Denuvo Anti-Tamper is used as like an anti-piracy measure, and it does affect games' performance, but it's at least just in the executable files. It doesn't really get any deeper into the computer. However, the anti-cheat is installed in ring 0 of your computer, or a kernel level, which is basically like where all the very important priority things happen in your computer. It is like so deep in your computer. It is extremely unnecessary. It's highly intrusive, and lots of people are really uncomfortable with giving a program like that kind of access. So, there are other people who are more technical than I am that can kind of break it down and explain why this is really not such a great thing. And, having an anti-cheat in a multiplayer game is kind of important because, you don't want cheating to happen, but this is kind of a situation where the cure is worse than the disease, But, aside from that, the actual bigger issue is that this was rolled out in an update. This was not disclosed when the game came out. So it's an issue of transparency because as soon as the update was rolled out and people realized what was going on with the update and, exactly what Denuvo Anti-Cheat was, they started review bombing Steam. And literally 7 hours ago, they're going to be taking it out, I have heard. So, they, apparently with the next patch, they're going to be taking it out. And obviously, you do want to prevent cheating, but it's just the links to which they go and the lack of transparency, because according to a lot of reviews on Steam, there are so many people that are so unhappy with it because, if they had known that this was going to be a part of the game up front, they wouldn't have bought the game. They wouldn't have bought the game. They wouldn't have played it. They wouldn't have gotten invested in it because if you were to uninstall this anti-cheat, you can't play the game at all. Like, from what I heard, you would not even be able to play the single-player offline game without this anti-cheat there. So it's, just really uncomfortable sense of you didn't really know what you were signing up for when you actually put money out and bought the game. So, I mean, thankfully, they will be addressing that in the next patch. That is some good news, but it's just like, come on, Bethesda, can we at least have some goodwill last for a little while? Reese Bobby? Come on.
So how long do patches take to upload now?
It kind of depends on the patch and what they're doing and what all is involved with it. Let me see. It doesn't say exactly when the next patch is going to come out.
Man, I remember
hopefully
it taking
soon.
My whole night in order to patches to upload for a request, but.
And, I mean, obviously it will also depend on, your internet, the size of the patch. I mean, hopefully they'll make it to where that certain patch isn't so big so you don't have to wait forever,
right.
Because I swear, obviously this wasn't a patch, but, I was downloading Final Fantasy 15 as a part of the Game Pass. I swear it took me, 3 days or maybe longer to download everything because there was so much involved in it. I'm like, this is crazy. This is absolutely nuts.
Yeah. But what's interesting to me, too, is the infiltration on our privacy that they're, made people aware of really resonates with me because, we used to be so trusting of those things, and now there's so much software that, you hear people talk about I was talking to my daughter about Tropical Smoothie Cafe last night, and this morning I wake up and I have an ad on Facebook, and I'm like, really? Really? Come on. But that sort of thing is just really mainstream now, and I think we're finally starting to understand, how much of that is in our daily lives and what we depend on and what maybe we shouldn't depend on so much. Mm-hmm. It's very scary to me. I don't know why. I even just, other people being in charge of what we hear, see, think. More on that later.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And I mean, this is more of a thing of just being informed because I'm sure that there are some people out there who don't really care, who maybe just use their PC for gaming and nothing else. And so it's not as big a deal to them and they wouldn't mind, but it's just the idea that this was not disclosed when people bought it, so they didn't know, so they couldn't make that informed decision of, do I want this product or not? Because, I mean, being completely honest, if I had a gaming PC, I would not want something like that on my computer. At all.
But then, when you did the patch, did you have to do the patch in order to play?
Yeah, you have to.
Shady.
Oh yeah. So yeah, that was to me. That's obviously the Denuvo anti-cheat itself would be an issue for me personally, but the bigger issue is just the lack of transparency and the kind of bait and switch that they kind of pulled with that.
All right. So let's get into it.
Alrighty.
I'm going to tell you the dictionary definition of science fiction.
Yes.
And that's science fiction, science, S-C-I-E-N-C-E, science, fiction, F-I-C-T-I-O-N. I have been talking to some people who are referring to sci-fi as S-Y-F-Y. I have no idea what that is, but, I think it's
because the Sci-Fi is rebranding, the Sci-Fi channel
on the television, but I don't know who
Maybe.
channels anymore, right?
I'm
just
it's all streaming these days.
Fun of that particular person.
It's all streaming these days, so
know it's in jest. Yes, exactly. Okay, so it is fiction based on imagined future scientific or technological advances and major social or environmental changes, frequently portraying space or time travel and life on other planets. That is dictionary.com. Should I look up fantasy?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Fantasy, the faculty or activity of imagining things, especially things that are impossible or improbable. Ooh. All right. So, I mean, I'm going to posit that these things, I kind of wanted to put one of them in the category of the other, but I'm ready to talk about it, I think.
Okay. Yeah, and I mean, there's like a lot of, I think, preconceived notions that people have when you like when you say the word science fiction or fantasy. You know, I'm sure that there are certain images that pop into our heads when we think of that. You know,
yeah,
like
fantasy, unicorns, magical beings,
things like Lord of the Rings or Game of Thrones, where it's like where it's either like our past or it's a world that's similar to our past, you know? And it's usually got like a prophecy or chosen ones or something like that going on, you know? Something supernatural.
It's usually something that is possible, you know, like it's, there's some kind of fantastical element to it, but it's still something that you can relate to in the sense that it's, there's a planet, usually there's a map of that planet or place. It's usually not terribly unfeasible aside from whatever the fantastical element is. So like magic, I suppose, or the rings being forged. I think my favorite part of fantasy entertainment is that there's always something in it that makes it extra. Like Fantastic Beasts, set in the past, but we can relate to a lot of the things that are happening around the main characters. And then there's this Fantastic Beast elements with magic and people who have different powers than us. But you can relate as yourself to you being a muggle or a, oh gosh, what do they call?
Squid?
Non-magic people in the United States.
Oh, non-mag?
Yeah.
Isn't that it?
No, being a nomad.
Nomad.
Yeah.
I was close.
So you can think of yourself as a nomad, right? And then you could say, okay, in this world, I would be obviously a nomad who would be watching this stuff. I wouldn't be enjoying what Credence and his family are doing in this first movie, but I could see myself in this without the magic. I've been obsessed lately with the idea of like having parties or throwing or going to places in cosplay or going anywhere. Honestly, I guess I'm just obsessed with cosplay, but going to places dressed as a character from something that you watch, so your fandom, but not being like a major character. You know, like you go to a convention and people who are dressed as stormtroopers or people who are dressed as Hera or people who are dressed as Darth Vader, you know who they are and people dress as those. But the idea of like dressing as a Mandalorian, not the Mandalorian, but a Mandalorian, or dressed as someone in the cantina when Han goes to see Jabba, you know, like that kind of thing, being something that is part of that world, but not identifiable as a character in the series. Does that make sense?
Oh, no, it does.
So it's kind of like the same thing that I would imagine with like Fantastic Beasts, where you would be someone who is in that era. Where are they, in New York? Being in that time, but also like having this, I guess it's not as cool when you're just a nomad, but you know, being someone who works for the Ministry of Magic, but not someone who is named in any
who just goes about as if, you know, this is all just normal, everyday stuff, because it is normal, everyday stuff.
Right. So, like, that's what I think intrigues me the most about fantasy is that it's got this, like, element that makes it extra, but you can still sort of, like, dream about what it would be like for you to be in that element. Okay, so we know some of the major fantasies are Lord of the Rings. You wouldn't call Lord of the Rings science fiction.
Oh, no.
Harry Potter, Fantastic Beasts. What else?
Game of Thrones.
Oh, yeah, Game
or
of Thrones.
A Song of Ice and Fire. You know, like, that kind of stuff. That's, you know, pretty I think what a lot of people think of when they think of fantasy.
Sure.
But the truth is, I mean, that Star Wars belongs in this group just as much as Lord of the Rings does. And
right.
I know, like, probably a lot of people immediately think, oh, it's science fiction because it takes place in space and there's technology going on that's, like, way beyond what we have and everything. But the truth is that that's not just what makes up science fiction. There's a lot more that actually goes into a science fiction story than just future or space or technology. Like, there's a lot more behind the intent than just the surface elements. And, so Star Wars, obviously it has all of these elements, but, it doesn't drive the story, and so science fiction, the technology, the scientific principles that are kind of either used or assumed to be true within the setting of the story, that's what drives the story forward.
Okay, so Star Trek would be science fiction, correct?
Yes, because it involves, space exploration, science and its application, the forwardment and advancement of humankind. So, whether we're talking about the original series, Next Generation, Voyager, Deep Space Nine, all of the different series and all of the different movies, they all involve in some way the technology drives the story forward. The science drives the story forward. Without the science, without the technology, you don't really have as much of a story, if any story left,
But how are the travel and, I don't know, having a Star Destroyer or building a Death Star, how is that not part of the science technological advancement of the world that Star Wars takes place in?
Because, I mean, you could take out all of these futuristic elements and you could still have the backbone of the story of Star Wars. You could plunk it into something medieval, and I mean, you'd have to make some adjustments, but you would still have the story of Star Wars. Whereas if you tried to do that with Star Trek, it wouldn't happen at all. Like, there's a much deeper application of science. It's not just like the aesthetic of science, it's actually the application of it. Kind of like how Stargate. I was trying to kind of like how the Stargates are very, very involved in the storylines of the series. You can't just take out the Stargates and have the series. That's not going to work. You have to have the science working within the story and not just be present in the story. One of the things when I was kind of like looking up and kind of reading up on this was I kind of like came to the realization that, there is a lot of science fiction out there that we might not these days think of as science fiction, but is very much science fiction because it was the beginning of science fiction. And it was one of my favorite stories as when I was growing up, introduced by Wishbone. Thank you very much. It was Journey to the Center of the Earth by H.G. Wells. And at the time, the technology that they were using itself wasn't all out there, and the theories obviously are not correct, but it was that theory that he put out there and posited and followed along that strongly influenced the story and drove the plot forward. And so even though we look back at that and we're like, oh, that's kind of funny, that he dreamed that this, the center of the earth was hollow and that there was this world there, that just sitting there waiting to be discovered. At the same time, it was those scientific principles that motivated him to search out and explore and discover exactly what was at the center of the earth.
What was really there. Yeah. Yeah, no, I can see that. And it's funny when you think about it, the elements that are scientific, they really aren't, other than kyber crystals and being able to make a lightsaber, and I guess the Force, but how is the Force any different than God, religion, believing that there's something bigger than you?
Yeah, the Force is really more of a fantastical element. It's kind of nebulous. It's not really well explained. It's, there's no kind of like scientific discovery regarding the Force. The Force is just there. Now, if we could like go in and like explore the Force and like what it is, like, I mean, in the prequels, we were kind of given the hint of midichlorians and that there's something involving that, but like that's the only thing that we're ever given as far as like discoveries regarding the Force and how it works and things like that.
I'd be really interested. Have you read any of the EU books at all?
It depends on the series, but yeah, I've read some of them. I
know a few guys who have read like everything ever written, and it would be really interesting to see if there's more technological advancements that happen. There's. I just finished watching a Rebels episode where the Empire has like reconstructed these robots to be able to seek out the Rebel base and to be able to bring that information back to the Star Destroyer and tell the Empire where it is. That plan is foiled, but the way that they reconstructed the droid, that's not scientific advancement?
Well, I mean, the technology was already there and existing. I'm assuming.
Yeah, like, from what I thought that they reconstruct.
Yeah, so I mean, and while that was necessary for that plot, the overall plot isn't really driven by that scientific discovery, more or less.
Right. There is also an element in Star Wars too that I know, like the super geeks and the super nerds, and I'm going to get lots of trouble for this from everyone I know, but it's not necessarily a time and space as far as Earth time and space goes. Like there is a before and an after of an event, but there's no, and the event isn't even like an event. It's an event per a movie that we know of. Like it's that okay, sure, before that and after that. But that helps people sequence where to watch certain things and where certain things fall. Like with Mandalorian, we know that that's happening. We hope it's happening in a certain period of time, but it's not a certain period of time like in the future or a certain period of time in the past. It's in and of itself in this world.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it does say like in the beginning, like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Sure,
so
but okay.
we still don't have an exact reference for exactly where and when this is taking place, just in our past. So,
right. Okay, so let's talk about something like Battlestar Galactica.
Yes, something that you know very much about.
Well,
a lot more than me.
That's science fiction, right?
Mm-hmm. Because I haven't like seen like anything of Battlestar Galactica.
But we don't make those ships, and it's based in an earthly realm. So I don't know. I feel like I'm going to have to digest this one for a bit. I was ready to be like, oh, Star Wars is definitely science fiction. But now I'm feeling a little different about it.
Yeah.
I do want to like ask everyone out there to kind of like argue with us though. I feel like the EU's got to have some kind of good arguments. This is like a research paper, right?
Yeah.
In high school.
Yeah.
Where you had to write a paper on, your teacher's like, oh, you can write whatever you want. Just make sure it's a persuasive essay. Let's go, guys. Come on. This is your high school assignment.
Yeah.
For 30-year-olds.
And I mean, I can only like speak personally for the expanded universe content that I've personally consumed.
Sure.
I haven't like consumed all of it, or probably even close to all of it. But of that I've consumed, like it really kind of continues the whole themes where it focuses more on characters, plots, things like that going out rather than scientific discoveries, and where the science doesn't really propel the heart of the story forward. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
And I mean, that does kind of make sense to me because like the expanded universe is an interesting thing in and of itself because it's basically authorized fan fiction where the writers themselves, you know, obviously they're not George Lucas or the other writers that were involved in the Star Wars movies, but they still had to, you know, contract and get permissions and, you know, go through all of this, you know, just to be able to write these. So, I mean, I kind of assume that there are certain things that they had to stick to, certain things that they had to avoid. I know one thing that was really a big issue was that for a long time, authors were not allowed to write about Luke being in a romantic relationship or pursuing a romantic relationship.
Oh.
That was something that they did eventually like come around to, and they introduced Mara Jade, and they had this whole thing where they got together. But that was one thing that for a long time that authors were not allowed to really write or address much of. So obviously, like, knowing that, I kind of assumed that there was some level of creative control from up top, where even if they weren't directly writing the story, there was still like, okay, well, you can't write about that. Oh, well, I'd like to see more focus on that. Or I'd like to see, I'd like to see going in this direction or something,
Yeah, I can see that. I wanted to also discuss a little bit our favorite thing to debate, comics.
Yay,
particularly
comics.
like the MCU.
Mm-hmm.
I was really hoping that one would fall under science fiction.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not really sure why. I guess if you were to take apart Guardians of the Galaxy, because it's in space.
But again, is the science the backbone of the story, though?
Well, it depends on what you're talking about.
And see, this is where, like, the lines kind of get a little blurry, because, like, really science fiction and fantasy and, like, every other type of fictional work falls under the general umbrella of speculative fiction, which is, basically the umbrella term for fiction works. Anything that isn't nonfiction can fall, or just about anything that's under not nonfiction can fall under speculative fiction. It covers science fiction, fantasy, horror, thrillers, mysteries, all that kind of stuff. So it's, when you start to, include like maybe certain elements, the lines can maybe get a little blurry, but it kind of helps me personally to say that, okay, science fiction, look for the backbone of the story. What is driving this story forward? And if science or technology or, exploration or the betterment of mankind, if that is not this included in this backbone of the story, then I have to say, it's not science fiction. It may be close to it. And what I know some people have kind of termed science fantasy to kind of describe Star Wars and other things like it that are set in kind of what one would say is a futuristic-esque setting where it has technology that we don't have, but it's not science fiction. I think that's a pretty apt descriptor for it, science fantasy, because it contains science, but it's not the heart of the story itself.
Well, and we've talked about science being a loose part of certain elements. Tony and Bruce Banner, they're always talking about gamma rays and how this, that, and the other thing does different things, but there's no science behind like the Tesseract.
Yeah.
Right? There's no actual science behind vibranium. These are fantastical elements.
Physics, but still.
Okay, right. Exactly. But the concept of what drives the story forward is fantastical. It's the characters and the way that they respond to what's happening to them. I'm trying to think if there was anything else that I wanted to make sure we talked about. Okay, so let's really quickly do Geek on Fleek. This one's fun too because we are like an opinion-based podcast, so it's hard to really say, okay, well, this is how important my opinion is on this. But Teegan, you had actually told me about something going on Twitter where people are talking about Disney Plus having acquired some stuff that they've been streaming, and the editing that they've been doing is particularly what I thought was interesting was Splash, because I don't remember it very well from growing up, but recently Aurelia and I both watched it, and I didn't notice that they had edited out Daryl Hannah's buttocks a bit. So people are up in arms because of that. The stuff that we are used to having watched historically has been edited for audiences now, without like us knowing, without our consent, because we don't own it. But in a way, we like collectively do as a group of people who grew up with this. Particularly, I guess it's like swear words and. There's some historical stuff too. Did you read more than I did as far as like what people are saying?
I mean, I've just like, I haven't been involved in the whole like discussion too much because I don't have Disney Plus, so it's like, you know, it doesn't really affect me personally. I had just like noticed some of my Twitter friends talking about it, and some of them were just vehemently, you know, anti-censoring, and they were up in arms, and they were going to cancel their, you know, subscriptions and everything like that. And I mean, I did like, you know, pull up some articles and like look into it because I was kind of curious as to what censoring was going on and, you know, what all was happening. Because I know with some of the classic Disney stuff, there is some, you know, very racist elements that are present, you know, because it was written in a time where, you know, that was okay to put that out there.
Right.
You know, and so I thought that perhaps they just wouldn't put it out there because, you know, we want to protect the brand image and everything like that. But it looks like some things they are putting out there, but they're censoring them. They're removing elements or just cutting some things completely. And, you know, I kind of feel like it's either put it out there or don't. Like, if, you know, this is your history, you can't just change it to make it okay. You know, like,
and I think that's what's important about that debate.
You know, just stand on your stand on your mistakes. Say, look, you know, this is bad and this is why, and, you know, we were trash back then for allowing this, you know, because, you know, this was acceptable. But, you know, just stand on it. Or don't show it if you don't want, you know, people to see it. You know, it's just as simple as that. You know, no one's forcing them to put these things on their streaming service. They have plenty of content that, you know, they don't have to rely on, you know, these certain things in order to, you know, get people to watch, you know. But that's just, you know, kind of how I feel about that. You know, I don't really like the whole censoring, rewriting of history. You know, I feel kind of similar to how George Lucas, you know, keeps changing up Star Wars in the original Star Wars. Like, I wish I still had my original boxed VHS set that was pre-1997 because, you know, it has that original cut that was shown in theaters that was not tampered with in any way. And, you know, because he's just gone back in and he's changed things and he's tampered with it and several times already. And it's just like, George, just stop. Like, it was fine. It is fine. Like, stop messing with it. You know, just put it down, step away. You know, it's like, just stand on it. Don't change it. Just stand on it.
Right. And I think that there's definitely a testament to our history as well that's present there too. You know, changing the background characters or changing what people looked like or what dolls looked like in the background is kind of irritating just because it like you said, you should stand by it. I think the possibility of changing it so that some people don't get their feelings hurt is trouble because we're so conditioned to believe that, you know, our opinions are right no matter what. And, you know, I don't want my kid to see this or to hear that word. It takes away a certain kind of responsibility you have to your children or a responsibility you have to yourself to either be open-minded and research something that you don't understand or teach your children about it. But there's always going to be people out there who are ignorant and closed-minded. So really, like, it just exemplifies the diversity of people, I suppose.
Yeah. And, I mean, like, some of the things, like, they seem to they seem to apply the censorship a bit unevenly. Because I know one of the examples of the censorship was a 1932 short film called Santa's Workshop. And in the original cut, there were these stereotypical black dolls, which I assume were probably like gollywogs or very similar to that. And they removed that from the version that's streaming on Disney Plus. But they kept in some stereotypically Asian dolls. And so it's like, okay, well, if you're going to remove the offensive things, why aren't you removing all of it?
All of them, exactly. Yeah. And who decides what's offensive and what isn't?
Yeah, and like there was this hoopla about a symbol from a fez in Gravity Falls that they removed in the show, but they kept in the thumbnail. And it's like, okay, at this point, to me personally, maybe it's just, how I view things, but to me it seems a bit performative that they're just taking these things out and leaving other things in. Like,
right,
you're so
no
like
rhyme or reason to it.
Yeah, like you're so focused on one thing, you're missing these other things as well.
Exactly. All right. Anything else you wanted to talk about with science fiction versus fantasy?
I think the whole like science fiction versus fantasy debate. I mean, obviously this is all under speculative fiction, and we can talk about this probably till the cows come home, really.
Sure.
But I think it's just a really neat thing to kind of sit back and think about these things that, we've watched, things that we've consumed, and we haven't really like put a second thought as to what genre it might belong to and why it might belong to a certain genre. And, maybe we can get into comic books later, but,
right.
but, the whole like, speculative fiction genre, the whole, genre of fiction and nonfiction, it's, you don't really think about it until later. You kind of, at least these days, you kind of go and you consume first, and you don't really think about what it fits into and why. I remember when I was growing up and going to the library, they had all these different sections, and so you would go to a certain section to find a certain story or a certain book. But these days, with streaming or whatever, we have the different categories, but we have so many things that are like, oh, this is your recommended section that is like kind of personalized based on what you like, that we don't really give a second thought to what we're consuming and why we're consuming it. So I think it's interesting to kind of sit back and think about, okay, what is this? And why does it belong to this? And therefore, why would we be consuming it? I'm a very sciencey, geeky person in that regard. So I enjoy, consuming media that is concerned with science, that, deals with scientific theories, even if it is like scientific theories that are thrown, way past what we've even discovered yet. It's still interesting to see that speculated on. And on the other hand, I do also like fantasy. I like, kind of sitting back and looking at a world that is similar to ours, but with some added fantastical elements that, kind of just liven it up and make it just a little bit more interesting. So, I think it's a fun exercise. And I think maybe we should do this again with something else.
Oh, maybe in a few weeks.
Maybe.
All right. So with that, I think it might be your turn to close.
Oh, yeah. Yes, it is. So, Lindsay has already given you y'all's homework assignment. Yes. So, should you choose, please explain why Star Wars or your favorite brand of scientific fiction or fantasy is the way it is. Is it science fiction? Is it science fantasy? Is it something else entirely? Let us know. We have Facebook, we have Instagram, we have Tumblr, we have Twitter, so we have lots of different ways for y'all to contact us. So with that, I'm Teegan.
And I'm Lindsay. And thanks for getting nerdy with us tonight on Views and Headcanons.